we have started our recording, and we will make sure that we also edit the slides in afterwards so that the pictures are available for those who want to see them.
Awesome.
But before sharing my screen, I think one of the key things that is often kind of difficult when it comes to cancer is wading our way through the information. There is so much that is shared. There's a lot of discussion on the internet. There are so many different talks on YouTube, different advices being shared. And for those who are signed in, you are welcome to share with me either through maybe showing your hand or a thumbs up or using one of those emoticons. Have you also experienced that when you are doing research for any kind of health problem, but in particular for cancer, that there's a lot of contradicting information? On the one side, we see that the keto diet is the most important. On the other side, we see that that diet is most important. Then somebody else is sharing all the studies that pertain to the carnivore diet, and someone else is sharing their experiences and different testimonies, different experts. And in the end, we're bombarded with such a lot of overwhelming information. And here I will share with you that for me, as a general practitioner, I'm not a specialist. So even for me, I look at all that information, and for a long time period, it was extremely overwhelming for me, because even after qualifying as a medical doctor, I said to the Lord, I don't know how to wade through this information. I don't know how to distinguish between what is accurate and what is not. And what is even harder is that it's not just about being able to kind of listen to something and think, oh, this sounds right, or that sounds right. It's about the fact that none of us have the time to really delve into medical studies, look at what those medical studies show, look at what all the potential factors are that play into that. I'm hearing some sound, echo sound. Bev, I don't know if it's possibly my sound coming through to you in your guys' microphone, so I don't know if you want to mute on that side, just in case.
And we can mute ourselves.
All right, I'm going to try that again. If there's any other strange sounds, let me know. It sounds like it's gone away, so I don't know. But if you hear anything, just give me a wave or stop me. So basically, for the average person, and even for those of us who have studied for many years in a university setup, it is still difficult to wade through information and actually sift through accuracy. And for that particular reason, I am wary of bringing in too many studies, because each and every scientific study has value, but every single scientific study also has certain factors that affect how we interpret it. And those interpretations can be affected by what is the population group that was studied? What were the additional factors that were possibly not taken into account when evaluating whether something worked or didn't work, or why they became sick, or whatever the case may be? So I'm going to share with you today, we're going to actually go all the way back to just looking at the straightforward anatomy and physiology of how the body is put together. And hopefully that can give us some basic ideas and some basic principles without needing to get too technical with information that can sometimes be very, very confusing. With that also being said, many, many people for years and years and years, in fact, for centuries before scientific studies were done and published to the extent that we see them now, people were able to work out ways of healthy living. And I think to a large extent that came from using common sense and logic. So we're going to try and employ a couple of those principles as well. If we try and understand what the problems are that actually trigger cancer development, that is very hard to analyze or discuss until we go all the way back to figuring out what is the actual process. So to address that, I want to start off by just looking for a few moments at what normal cells are, how they behave, and how that actually plays into the picture. So I'm sure that all of you will agree with me that you have seen what a little building block looks like. If you think of a building that you put together, if you use bricks, those little bricks are tiny little building blocks that form a part of a larger building. Now, I know that building material also varies from place to place. In South Africa, it's really common for us to use brick for buildings. I know that in the US, they use a lot more wood or timber than what we do over here. Bev, I don't know what you guys use in Canada. I have no idea how to one would make a house that withstands the temperatures that you guys experience on that side. But if if we think of the different places with all their different building materials, it could be, that we're thinking about small little bricks that build a wall. We could be thinking about different portions of timber that are put together to build a structure. But regardless of what building materials we use, in order to put a building together like a home, it consists of multiple different parts. Now, the body is exactly the same, and even without needing to share any pictures or any special something at this stage, I'm sure all of you have a picture in your mind of those different components that make a building, and that is how we can understand cells. Cells, it's a word that we use in anatomy or in the medical field, but it is just the fancy word for the tiniest little building blocks that make the body. And those building blocks, just like in the composition of a home or a office building or a commercial building in a city, as with any building, not all the parts of that building are exactly the same. The whole building is not made of only bricks or only timber or only metal. There are different components and they all have different shapes and sizes, and cells are exactly the same. So we have different cells for each and every different organ system in the body, and those cells are the small little building blocks. Each and every cell in and of itself is also a complex little structure, but we're not going to delve so deeply into that. The only thing that is important for us to realize at this stage is that those little cells and those little building blocks are different for different parts of the body. So, for an example, the cells in my skin look different. In fact, my skin has different layers, and in each different layer of my skin, there are cells that look a little bit differently. Then I have cells in my heart that look completely different to the cells in my muscle. And so each and every organ is comprised of multiple little cells that all have a specific shape and size and function for that particular organ. Some cells are there for strength and structure, for instance, with muscle, to be able to stretch and move and accommodate movement. Other cells have a completely different job, like the cells in the organs that secrete hormones, for instance. The little cells that secrete thyroid hormone or reproductive hormones or growth hormone or, those sort of things also look different. So in each different part of the body, the cells are different. And in the process where these cells are being produced, there is a very specific process that actually helps us to understand what goes wrong when we're looking at cancer. So I'm going to share my screen with you at this stage. We'll do a very quick recap with what we've spoken about now, and then we'll delve into what the cancer process is. So let me just see that I get all this technicality right. And Bev, as I'm sharing my screen here, as I always mention, I'm no longer able to see any of your faces or any interactions. So if there's anything important for me to pay attention to, you're welcome to just interrupt me.
Great, thank you.
Perfect. So this is part one, and we're going to address these things in different sections. And in part one, we're talking about what and why, but we'll dig a little bit deeper. This is a graphic illustration of just one area in the body, and when we're looking at the blood, we are seeing cells that look, they actually have different shapes and sizes for the different cells within our blood. So this graphic illustration shows us some red blood cells, which are these strange little disc shapes. They're the red color. Then we also have the white blood cells, which actually have a big variety of different shapes and sizes because there are different kinds of white blood cells. We also have little platelets, and they all do their different jobs. We have other cells. These are, for instance, examples of a type of a muscle cell. And as you can see, they have a spindle shape. They've got a completely different shape to the others that we've seen so far. Pardon me, let me just make sure that my screen doesn't interfere here. So muscle cells look a little bit different. This is actually a microscope image, and it's a different part of the body again. And knowing which organs have which kind of cells and what they all look like is not the focus of what we're talking about. I'm showing you these pictures merely to illustrate that there are different parts, different cells, and they all look quite differently. And as you can see in this particular picture, there is a uniformity for each group of cells or each kind of cells. This picture looks well organized. We can see that these different cells kind of fit snugly close together, and that varies depending on what organ we're talking about. But there's an organized appearance to these cells. The question that we now need to address is, How are these cells produced? And what is the process in the cell factory? Now, again, we're not going to delve very, very deeply into all the technicalities, but it's an intricate process. And I'm mentioning that for the sake of recognizing that we can never, even in an hour or 3 hours of discussion, really unpack all the intricate processes that accompany this. We're looking at the bare basics, but it helps us to understand how the Lord has made our bodies. And He's made our bodies to have very, very special factories. I use that term lightly because it's a more complex process than that simplification. But these little cell factories are there to help to produce new cells. Cells do die. When we look at our skin cells, they actually, through friction, they come off from the skin layer. Certain cells have a long lifetime. Other cells have a very short lifetime. And depending on the lifetime, the cells reproduce at a specific rate to keep up with what is lost and replace what is lost. And in these cell factories, there's a specific process that happens, and that is a process that I would call quality control. Just like in every other factory, when we talk about the factories in our normal industrial areas, each factory that produces any specific product has either someone or an entire department of workers that are assigned the task of doing quality control. They go through each and every product that has been produced. They check the quality, they check the shape, they check for dents and damages, they check for seals to seal properly. There's all sorts of processes depending on the product. But there's a quality control process, and there's a very specific person who needs to know that particular product really well in order to do that job. So, for instance, if I'm the expert of recognizing what a rotten apple looks like, I'm not going to be the one that is employed in the button factory to check the quality of buttons. I'm going to be employed in the apple packaging factory, where I can check the quality of those apples and make sure that I recognize when they are not at the best quality. So as the different role players have an expertise level in that particular product, in the self-same way, each and every part of the body where those little cells are being produced, there are mechanisms for quality control for that particular cell, so that when skin cells are being reproduced, that the quality is checked. When blood cells are reproduced, the quality is checked. And what happens, just like in a factory, is that when the quality control mechanisms detect that there is an abnormal cell, or a cell that doesn't meet the standards, it's got the wrong shape, it's not quite the right size, it's got something wrong with it. Within that quality control process, even within our bodies, in these tiny little minuscule factories, the abnormal cells are actually taken out of the factory line, and they are taken apart. Their little components are reabsorbed, so they are moved out of the factory line. And that is absolutely crucial, because it means that once that cell is abnormal, it is not allowed to continue reproducing. It is taken out of the factory line really early on in that process, so that no abnormal cells are being reproduced. Does this sound like a good process to all of you? I know that you can't show me all your emoticons and everything, but surely you would agree that this is something that is really crucial. And before going any further, I should recognize here that I really, when I think about this process and all the details that were even too complicated for me to understand when I was studying this in university, genetics and cellular sciences and all of those things, what I did understand through all the years of going through this information is that we serve an incredible God, a God who's made sure that all these processes are perfectly designed to perfection to ensure that we are not only healthy, but that we can maintain health. That when something is damaged, when we lose cells, when we have a wound where new cells have to be formed to reunite those layers of skin that have been split open through an injury, in all of those processes, quality control measures are in place to ensure that our health is preserved. However, there are certain scenarios where this quality control process does not happen the way that it should. And an example of that in a factory line would be that if something isn't working properly, there could be major risks to that. If this particular power cable was not checked properly in the quality control lines of the factory, it is possible that it could be responsible for some serious hazards. And that is what happens when our body's quality control is not working properly. When this process actually fails, there are tremendous consequences that happen as a result. And we're going to summarize just a few of those really, really briefly so that we can kind of keep track of what the implications are. One of the major implications of this is that those cells that are being reproduced are no longer in the original perfect shape and structure that they are supposed to have. Now, this is just a graphic illustration. It's not a specific reliable image of any microscopic cancer cell per se. But let's take, for example, this image of a cell, and let's use as an example that these little green blobs on top of that are not supposed to be there. If this cell came out of the factory line with these extra little growths on there, and if quality control is not working the way that it should be working, the implication is that that cell continues to go through the whole process. It is released and assembled in the organ structure where it is meant to be. But when this cell is now there again, it will be reproduced with these abnormalities. The technical side that we maybe should add in this is that each and every cell contains its own cell factory in its own core. In the nucleus of that cell is where it has the starting processes of the new cell that will be replicated. In other words, for each cell, it gives birth to its own replica, if we can put it simply. And as that happens, if the original cell was abnormal and wasn't destroyed in the quality control process, it will reproduce an abnormal cell. These abnormal cells have specific characteristics, which we're going to summarize here. And I want to say again, for completion's sake, that as we oversimplify some of these things, it might become technically oversimplified as well. There are so many extra details that one could add to this. But for the purposes of what we're looking at, let's just briefly, quickly look at what might be the implication in the structure. This again is a representation of where things are not looking quite as organized as that previous picture that we looked at. You'll remember that that previous picture that we looked at, the cells were all looking the same. There was a clear order and structure there. And here we've got a couple of things that don't all look exactly the way that they don't all look the same as their neighbors. There's a question mark with this particular image. So what are the issues when it comes to that failed quality control? What are the real implications? Four of the main things that happen as a result is that we can have replication of cells with abnormal shape and size, abnormal function, unchecked replication, and unchecked location. So let's quickly just run through these with a little bit more detail. When the cells have abnormal shape and size, what does that really mean? Well, if you have a structure that you're trying to form, if you have an organized organ, let's take, for example, skin cells. Skin cells, the bottom cells, and the layers that come closest to the surface aren't all identical, but in each layer, there's a uniformity of the cells that occur in each of those layers for the different functions in that skin. Now, if I suddenly have abnormal cells that have the wrong shape, maybe they're bigger than what they're supposed to be, and they don't have the same size, that might cause sort of a visible change, depending on how many cells. Now, if it's only one cell, it probably isn't much of an issue. If it's maybe only 5 cells, it might not be an issue either, depending on where that is. And the body's immune system might be able to recognize, even after the factory process has completed, that there's an abnormality here. And sometimes the immune system is able to actually recognize those abnormal cells and take them apart, disassemble them, and remove them and destroy them to allow for no further replication. But if these abnormal cells with their abnormal shape and size continue to replicate, we see the visible development of what we would typically term a tumor or a tumor growth or a cancerous growth. Now, I'm using the skin as an example because that is where we can visibly see this, but this can happen anywhere in the body. And inside the body, in the internal organs, deep in the breast tissue or in the colon or in the pancreas or in the brain, we might not see this process happening. Even on my skin, I might not see the abnormal cells superficially just with a naked eye when the process first begins. but they are abnormal in shape, abnormal in size, and typically what also happens is that they don't do the function that they were meant to do. Now, there are certain scenarios where this is more relevant than other scenarios, but a classic example of this is, for instance, if it is a hormone producing cell, it might not produce the hormones that it's meant to produce exactly the way that it is. It might not regulate the hormone production. It might overproduce or underproduce the hormones. So that is just an example of where the function might change. And then another example of this is, for instance, when I'm developing a tumor because of cancerous cells developing in my kidneys. They might not do the job that they're meant to do either. So depending on which organ is affected, it will affect how the function is affected. The issue really comes in to a large extent also with this unchecked replication. Because what we said as well, or so far, is that in the little factory process where these cells are being made, they're meant to be controlled in terms of their shape and their size and their function. They're meant to be taken out of production if those things aren't correct. But that quality control process in that factory also has a very, very specific process of making sure that reproduction happens at the correct rate. In other words, as I'm losing skin cells, as it's coming off with friction, with my clothing, or in the bed at night, or wherever I'm working, as I'm losing cells, the reproduction rate is meant to kind of equal out so that I'm not producing faster than what I'm losing. Anywhere where I'm producing faster than what I'm losing, there will be growth, right? And that is normal in children. But when we look at the growth that happens from a baby through the stages of childhood, all of that growth is symmetrical and happens at a very, very controlled rate. And that process is particularly controlled by how the Lord has made that. He has made sure that that growth process is harmonious, that all the different parts of the body grows harmoniously throughout the childhood development stage. But when we're talking about cancer growth, those cells, as they are being reproduced, are not only abnormal in shape and size and function, but there's also an abnormal rate of growth. And typically speaking, cancer growth will be faster than the rate at which those cells in that particular organ are generally meant to grow. In addition to that, in the later stages of cancer, most of us have heard about the idea of cancer spreading throughout the body. And what that entails is that some of these abnormal cells can actually be transported either through the lymphatic system or through the blood circulation to other locations. And where, generally speaking, a cancer cell that travels to another location will not grow anywhere else. Sorry, a normal cell that travels will not replicate in another location. A cancer cell, because it's abnormal in its entire functionality, that cancer cell, as it travels through the body into a different location, will then, in that new location, also continue to replicate. And that is what we basically, the long and the short, or the easy way of understanding what metastatic cancer is, or cancer that has spread to new locations. The way that they are able to test this is, for instance, if I have breast cancer, if that breast cancer is transported and if it is spread to another organ system, like to my lungs, when they do biopsies and they actually take portions of the tumor that then develops in my lungs, they're able to, under the microscope, see clearly the structure and the shape of those cells resembling that of breast tissue. Similarly, if the breast cancer spreads to the brain, if they were ever to biopsy that, they would be able to detect breast cells that have become abnormal and then growing in the wrong location. So I hope that this helps to give a little bit of a context and bit of background to help us to understand why this is such a crucial problem when it comes to cancer development, because you have not only abnormal cells that are being replicated, but they replicate faster than what they should. Their replication is not checked, or there aren't breaks that actually control the replication of that cancer cell as it should be in normal circumstances. Their function becomes abnormal, so they start doing things that they weren't meant to do, and they can spread to different locations, causing havoc in the areas where those cancer cells then go and replicate and form tumors in different or distant locations. Now, with that being said, the next question that usually pops up is, what on earth are we meant to do about this? But before we can answer that, we have to ask the question, what is it that actually triggered this? We now have a better understanding, I hope, and we're going to go through some questions in a bit, but I hope that this gives you a clearer understanding of how cancer actually comes about, But then the question is, why does this happen? Why does the factory suddenly stop with effective quality control? Why does that process become out of harmony with normal function? And there are a couple of factors that can play a role. Now, again, I'm emphasizing this and I'm repeating myself, but it's crucial for us to remember this. These are just a simplified couple of factors. We are not delving into all the depths of factors that do play a role, but I'm sharing with you some of the factors that have been proven in studies across the globe, across different locations, different nationalities, different population groups, different age groups. These are factors that have kind of been identified as a common denominator, factors that do tend to aggravate cancer development. In other words, these things can trigger cancer growth, but they also are responsible for the excessive, hasty growth of existing cancer when there are cancer cells in my body. We're going to delve deeper into these factors when we do the third part for the summit, but to run through them briefly, acidic blood is a major contributor to development of abnormal cell functions. And when I say abnormal cell functions, we are speaking about the factory, the quality control, the rate at which cells are being reproduced, but there are other cell functions that are also affected by these factors. We're kind of just zoning in on how it implicates cancer, but acidic blood is a big component of that. And when we come together again for the part a little bit later on, for part 3, we're going to talk about how to address these factors. But when it comes to acidic blood, there are multiple things that play into that. There are various things that actually aggravate blood acidity. Now, that is not the same, and I'll briefly mention this. This is not the same as somebody saying, oh, I really struggle with acid. When people say, oh, I've got a problem with acid, they're oftentimes referring to acid reflux in the stomach. And that's not the same as blood acidity, because we want acid in the stomach. It's necessary to digest our food. And if you want to know more about this, you can refer back to one of the other talks that we've done here on Elijah's Ministries channel. The talk was food fundamentals, and we spoke a little bit about healthy diet and things that can affect it. But blood acidity is affected by what we eat as well as the toxins that we are exposed to. So we'll get back to that later. Blood acidity is a major factor, and blood acidity not only has roles to play in triggering cancer development, but it also has major implications with how we can actually treat cancer. Poor oxygen levels is another factor that has been proven to implicate in this whole process. And that can be through various different mechanisms. It could be poor blood circulation, which is a separate point, as I mentioned here. But it could also be that my blood is just not receiving as much oxygen as it is meant to receive. That has many implications. When there are poor oxygen levels in my blood, it also means that I don't clear out toxins as effectively as I should. It affects my respiration. It affects how many oxidative molecules are formed in my blood, and that's a fancy term for havoc wreaked by toxins. Poor oxygenation can be something that comes about because of my environment. It could be that my home is not oxygenated well enough. It could be that I'm not having enough ventilation in my home or office or in the room that I'm sleeping in. So fresh air has a very big part to play, and obviously making sure that the body is circulating that effectively is part number 3. These things are affected by various different factors. It can be even affected by the way that I dress and cutting off blood circulation to parts of my body. One of the ways in which this has been shown to be a relevant thing is that when people are struggling with cancer, oxygen treatments can sometimes show a significant improvement in cancer shrinkage. So we know that there's a direct link between cancer growth and oxygen levels. And then the last 2 are ones that I'm going to just dwell on very briefly. Growth factors and growth hormones, and they are slightly different when we're looking at them technically in the body. But the bottom line of these 2 factors is that they are naturally in the body. They're meant to be there, but they have a specific effect on cancer. Now, let me explain that briefly. Growth factors and growth hormones are necessary in our bodies. They play various different healthy roles. They have a role to play in, for instance, growth of a child growing up into adulthood. They have a role to play in, the enlargement of the different organs and different organ parts and bones and strengthening of muscles as the child is growing into adulthood. But even for adults, growth factors are necessary for healthy muscles, healthy bones, for the cells that are replicating. They have an effect on the replication of healthy cells and reproduction or replication of cells. So these factors are there for a good reason. However, they are factors that very specifically affect cancer. And what I mean by that is that cancer cells are extra sensitive to these growth factors and growth hormones. Now, think of it very simply again. If we're thinking about these little cells, they have been reproduced in their abnormal condition. Quality control was not working the way that it should. So this cell is already abnormal in its shape and size and function. It's also abnormal in the sense that it replicates faster than what it should. But then it's also affected by growth factors and growth hormones. And what will those factors do for a cancer cell? It'll hasten the replication process. It actually exponentially increases the rate at which these cancer cells will develop and replicate. And that just means that this tumor grows and grows and grows faster than what other factors can dampen it down. I've briefly mentioned already that the immune system can detect abnormal cells and actually kill them off. And there are other ways in which the body can attack cancer cells naturally. But when we are dealing with a situation where these abnormal cells are being fed by different factors that actually increase the rate of reproduction or replication of those cells, if the replication rate is higher than the rate at which the body is able to dampen it down or kill them or destroy these abnormal cells, then the tumor will ultimately continue growing. We're going to come back to this in more detail, but I'm hoping that this gives us a picture that we can anchor onto when we are trying to identify correct information. When we are being given information about different treatments or different diets or different treatment protocols for cancer, we have to keep these factors in mind. We have to keep normal anatomy and normal physiology in mind in order to make a sound judgment call on what the most effective treatments are going to be. I'm sure that there are many other questions that are unanswered at this stage, but I'm going to pause the rest of the presentation here, and we're going to actually, let me rephrase that. I'm not going to pause the presentation here. I'm going to shift the presentation to a slightly different aspect. And I want to end this portion off at just a couple of points that we can continue anchoring onto. Most of you who are signing in, if you know me and if you've seen any of my other presentations, you will know that it's something that is very close to my heart, that we are very strongly encouraged by God's word not to lean on human understanding. We are profoundly warned to be careful of trusting human wisdom. So let's look very briefly as we end off this portion at what the Lord has put in place for us. And we're not delving into the treatment per se, we'll come back to that later. But I want to just highlight that in the first couple of books of the Bible, in fact, the first 3 chapters of the Bible, where God tells us how this world was brought into existence, bearing in mind that the introduction of any good book is where you kind of share that's the start of the story. You're trying to share one of the most crucial foundational aspects when you're introducing your book. And the way that God introduced his book, this word of, or this compilation of his words, is by highlighting how he created us and how he created the world. And there are a few things that come forward in Genesis chapter 1. And in particular, we see that there are a couple of things that God put in place. He made sure that there was light. He made sure that there was water. He separated the water from above and below. He made sure that there was an atmosphere of air. He ensured that there was sunshine, not just light, but also specific sunshine light. He created this rhythm between day and night. And as this rhythm was brought in, the Genesis chapter 1 emphasizes that it was evening and morning the first day, evening and morning the second day. This rhythm that came into place was then crowned with a special day of rest when he brought in the day of rest, the 7th day that he set aside and made it holy. The Bible says even God rested on this day. So it was a very special day for him. He also specifies in chapter 2 that once he created human beings, he specified what nutrition was the best for them. It is stipulated in that first portion of the Bible. And then it's stipulated that he took Adam and Eve, he put them in a garden to dress and to keep it. In other words, he basically clarifies the ideal physical activity or exercise that he set aside for these new special creatures that he had made. And I want us to pause recognizing that God spoke all these things into existence. But Adam and Eve, he made with his own hands. He breathed into their nostrils the breath of life. That's what the Bible tells us. In other words, there's a very personal connection there. And he put these two people that he had personally formed with his hands into this particular garden. He wanted them to be in the midst of the nature that he had made. So he actually gives us information about the ideal environment, the natural environment that he wanted them to be in, incorporating all of these aspects that he had created, incorporating healthful exercise to interact with nature, to dress and to keep the garden. And then he also gave them a very specific choice. He gave them the freedom of choice. He told them about something to stay away from, which was the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And he gave them a gift that was given specifically to humanity, and that is the gift of free choice. And all of this was undescribed with a relationship that he wanted to have with them, a relationship that was meant to be built on trust. That trusting relationship was meant to be like an umbrella that covers all the other parts. They were meant to look at this garden and everything beautiful God had made, the animals, the flowers, the birds of the air, the creatures in the waters, and all of this display was there to show them how incredibly powerful the love of their Creator was for them. And they were meant to trust Him enough to use all these good things that He had given them in the freedom that He had given them, and to stay away from where He said to them, don't go there. That is not good for you. As we delve into the rest of our discussion here today, we're going to be faced with choices. We're going to be faced with the choice of making decisions on, what do I think about this information? My encouragement to you is to keep in mind that your Creator loves you more than what words could possibly say. And this same Creator created the perfect world. He created everything that was beautiful and perfect. And if we actually reshuffle these specific elements that He put into nature, we can use this particular acronym, which is quite a famous acronym in certain circles. It's not the only acronym. There are various other acronyms that are used to describe this. But this acronym, the New Start acronym, helps to just reshuffle those same laws of nature into an organized way that we can remember them. And we can see here that we were created to fit by this loving Creator into a harmonious natural environment where there's a perfect nutritional balance to sustain perfect human health. There is healthful exercise. There's a good balance of water, and there are uses of water that can be, when employed in a wise manner, be healthful and helpful when it comes to fighting disease. God created the sunlight. He created temperance, which is abstaining from what He has warned us against, or abstaining from what is harmful, and using the good elements of nature, or the healthy laws of nature, in moderation. He's given us fresh air. He's given us ways to get rid of toxins every time that we breathe. He has given us rest. He's provided for us enough evidence to trust in His creative power and His all-knowing wisdom. And my plea to everyone who is struggling with the process of disease, whether it be cancer or any other disease, is to turn back to this God who says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. As we try to sift between human knowledge, human understanding, and what God has already created in the perfect world, and what He encourages and what He still wants to give us freely, I hope that this will help us to cling to accurate and truthful information. We will get to the rest when we are gathering back a little bit later, but I'm going to end my screen share, and then I want to open the floor for discussion, because I am pretty sure that there are many thoughts about this, and even though we're going to address them more fully as we continue in the discussions, we might defer some of the questions to later on in the discussion. At least we can see if there are specific questions that we can talk about this particular presentation so far, and then we will move on to the next one.
Excellent. Dr. Jade, thank you so much for that base for us to build on throughout our Cancer Connections Summit today. That was excellent. And we do have some questions. Christy, I see your hand up. Do you want to go ahead?
Yes, ma'am. What is the difference between cancerous malignant tumors and benign tumors? It seems as if a tumor has uncontrolled growth, that it would be the same, whether it's benign or malignant. So I'm asking, what is the difference?
Very good question. Thank you. Sorry, the connection was breaking up very briefly there, so I just wanted to make sure I hear your question correctly. And please do stop me if I seem to be off track with what you were asking. But if I understand correctly, the question is if you are dealing with different kinds of tumors, benign tumors versus malignant tumors are both tumor growths, and the question is, what is the difference? One of the main differences is that in benign tumors, we don't find that they spread to different locations. So that is one of the distinguishing um, elements between the two definitions, is that malignant tumors have the ability to spread to distant locations. The implication of that is that if a cancer or if a malignant tumor will only enlarge and grow in its own location without spreading, it means that it can safely be removed surgically if needed. Whereas with cancers or malignant tumors, because of their nature of spreading, it means that they kind of spread, they have these little tentacles into the local tissue, which makes it hard to excise them safely. But it also means that even when we're excising the original or the primary tumor, there's already the risk that it has started throwing off abnormal cells into distant locations. So that's basically the difference in the definition. Does that answer your question?
Mostly. So are you saying it's more contained? Is that kind of part of it?
Yeah, it does depend from cancer to cancer because there are certain malignant tumors that can be very aggressive. Some malignant tumors, in particular, some of the sarcomas, and there are various kinds, they can actually grow quite profusely, even though they don't spread to distant locations. So they can grow quite large. They can embed um, the, the benign tumors or the non-malignant tumors don't spread into other tissues, but the actual spread or the growth of that particular tumor can compress other tissues. So that still causes negative complications, if I can put it that way. So it doesn't mean that benign tumors are necessarily less damaging in their effect, but their treatment is somewhat different.
Okay, so are you saying, correct me if I'm wrong, are you saying that a whether it is benign or malignant has more to do with metastasis than it does uncontrolled growth?
Yeah, both of them. Well, I'll put it this way: uncontrolled growth is a common element between the two kinds of tumors, but the metastases are specific to malignant tumors.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Christy. There's a question in the chat about the life cycle of cancerous cells. Can you talk about the life cycle?
The question was, is it relevant to mention the life cycle of of cancer cells?
So the the one thing that I would mention about the life cycle is that as cancer cells develop, um, there are a lot of small little technicalities that play a role, in particular because the different cells in different organ systems naturally and normally also are different in the way that they reproduce. But I would personally say that for the purpose of this particular discussion, I wouldn't delve too deeply and too technically into the life cycle, simply because it can involve a couple of technical details that really makes it hard to keep focus of the main picture. Yes, cancer cells do have a life cycle, and the body is able to interrupt at different stages of that life cycle. The body is able to kind of contain the cancer differently depending on where it is in the life cycle. But the beauty of it is that the the natural mechanisms through which the body is able to detect abnormal cells and halt the replication of those abnormal cells is something that can be dealt with as a blanket effect. So I think that the life cycle aspect probably will be one that loses many of our viewers for this particular discussion if we delve too deeply into that.
Okay, good stuff. All right. Are there any other questions for this particular segment of our Cancer Connection Summit? Raise your hand, speak up. Oh, go ahead, Mariana. unmute yourself. Unmute yourself. Alois, need to unmute. Down in the left lower corner. There you go. There you go. Okay.
Now you muted yourself again.
No, you muted yourself again, Alois. Unmute, unmute.
There you go. Yeah.
Perfect. Leave it.
Thanks so much. On the 12th of January, I was diagnosed with lymphoma. And I'm just going through. I had to lab tests, and it's in Vancouver right now. And on the 23rd, I will get a phone call from the specialist where I stand. But they said it's lymphoma B, and it may be gone into leukemia. Did it come through?
Yeah, we heard you.
Yeah.
Was there a question that you wanted to ask in regard to that?
Yeah, with lymphoma, how is it with the treatment? What can I do while I'm waiting for the test result?
I'm sorry to hear about the news that you've received, because I'm sure that it is difficult news to have received, and I'm sure that you're probably not the only person who has signed in here today who has recently maybe heard about either a diagnosis, or maybe the specialists are doing investigations or are very suspicious of something. Sometimes the early phases of the testing doesn't always give 100% certainty of a cancer diagnosis, but sometimes the specialists might communicate a strong suspicion when they are seeing a couple of the dangerous signs. And I think the question that you asked is relevant for not only for your situation, but maybe for many people. What do I do in the interim when I've received the diagnosis, but I'm waiting to hear the recommendations, which oftentimes does not get discussed in the same consultation with the specialists? In that interim period, what can be done? I want to encourage you to sign in, or if you're not able to sign in for part 2 and 3 and 4 today, then make sure that you watch the recordings later on, because we're going to actually address exactly that in the presentations that are following. The presentation that Dana will be doing will be particularly relevant for something that you can begin to do immediately. And also in part 3 and 4 that we do later on, we'll address those specific factors.
Thanks so much.
No problem.
Excellent. Mariana, we're sorry to hear about that diagnosis. Thank you for being with us today.
Thanks
Share
for
this.
inviting us.
Also, I wanted to ask whether there is a difference when a person is of age, I mean older, or when a person is younger.
Very good question. If I heard that correctly, and just to repeat that for if we have anybody who didn't hear the question properly, correct me if I'm wrong. You're asking if there is a difference in age, or how a person's age affects your cancer diagnosis. Do I understand you correctly?
Yep.
So yes, there are differences, and those differences are affected by various different things. The kind of cancers that we see in young people or in children are typically slightly different kinds of cancers to what we see more commonly in adults. So the type of cancer has an impact, and we do see that there are differences in age groups with the sort of common cancers that occur in those age groups. Having said that, in recent years, cancers that were previously, for instance, completely unlikely to be seen in children are now occurring in children. Cancers that were previously only seen in specific age groups are now seen in more, broader age groups. So in general, cancer is increasing. It's on the rise. And that brings me to the second part of answering your question, and that is that the very fact that cancer is exponentially increasing at the rate that it is tells us that there are factors affecting it over and above just our age. And I believe that we will be addressing that Dana will speak about a couple of the major factors that do play a role, but we will also later on speak about factors, and that comes down to our exposure to toxicity more than just our age. Now, the way that that plays into the age is that the longer I have lived, potentially, the more ongoing my exposure may have been to certain toxins. So, for example, if I've been smoking and I've only smoked for 2 years as a young adult, my cancer risk is significantly lower compared to an older person who's been smoking for 50 years. In that sense, it's not just the age, but the longer duration of exposure to toxins that have an impact on the cancer. So I hope that that answers your question. Age does play a role, but it's more specifically related to the exposure of toxins. And then there are also other factors that we now see kind of seem to cross the borders of age from young and old. So there's lots that play into the development and the rate at which cancer actually grows.
Thank you. That was also a question that was well answered. Thank you. But I have also a question about EMF, electromagnetic impact on the body.
That's a very good question. We will address that more fully in the last, or in the second to last, in part 3 and part 4 of the summit today. So we will address some of those particular factors that we can zone in to assist with not only understanding what the impact is of those factors on the development of cancer, but also how they impact the treatment.
Fantastic. Thank you.
No problem.
Just, they always say you should stop smoking and drinking, whatever you have. And I was never a drinker, nor a smoker, nor did I drugs, nor did my parents. And I still have it.
That is very true. That is very, very true. And I think here I want to share with everybody who's watching, and I'm hoping that those who will be watching later on the YouTube recordings will also take this very, very seriously. There are so many different things that affect the development and the growth of cancer that in our short little time here together in this summit, we will never be able to cover all of them or really unpack all of those factors. And though we are kind of speaking about lifestyle factors as a foundational point, it is because the vast majority of cancers are affected by our daily choices. But it does not mean that people who have looked after their health are necessarily immune to cancer. And we're going to talk a bit more about that later on. But I also want to maybe just do a short advert here for a presentation that was recently uploaded onto a YouTube channel that I know Bev and them are also familiar with. It is a channel called the Med Missionary Channel, and they have uploaded a specific discussion on why I might be developing cancer, even though I've been a very healthy person and doing all the things that I know to be healthy. What could still be some of the reasons why cancer develops, regardless of my good efforts at protecting my health? So today we're not zoning into those more complicated things. We're going to be touching on some of the really bare basic factors that all of us have access to. But I would encourage everybody who's signing in for the summit to also go and have a look at that presentation, because I believe that it will answer some of those questions that burn in our hearts, because those are uncomfortable questions and frustrating questions when we think, I have been doing the healthy things. Why did I still get sick? And I think that presentation will help with that.
Thanks so much.
I will hunt for the link in.
Okay, I think Dana just boom, Dana just gave the link. Thank you so much, Dana.
Perfect.
Excellent. All right, there's another question. Let's see. It says, God has created us so beautiful. Praise his name. One more question, if I may. What is known about the beautiful mechanism of our white blood cells recognizing and attacking tumor cells? How can we enhance the body's ability to fight cancer? I know you'll be talking more about that in your subsequent presentations, but just talking quickly about the mechanism of the white blood cell, just to give a brief answer.
Absolutely. So to keep it very brief, the white blood cell action is very broad because there are so many different subtypes of white blood cells. And when I think about the immune system, which is what the white blood cells are a part of, the immune system is like the body's army. And just like in a military, we call it an army in South Africa. Do you guys call it the army in Canada? The military probably is more of an American term. But when you look at the military, it doesn't, all of the different role players are not all identical. You have somebody who operates the the front line. Somebody might be fighting right in the front lines of the battle. Some other people might be operating the machinery. Some people are up in the watchtowers. There are different soldiers in different positions, and they all have different expertise levels. In the same way, the immune system is comprised of different components or different role players, and all of those different little white blood cells have slightly different ways in which they help to protect the body. The entire immune system as a whole is what I'll answer this question with. The whole immune system in its totality is geared towards recognizing abnormal and dangerous intruders. And that does not only refer to intruders coming in from the outside. We know that harmful germs can come in from the outside. Dan is going to talk about harmful little guests that we don't want in our bodies. And the immune system is geared and trained and created to recognize those as abnormal. But the immune system is also 100% capable of recognizing abnormal cells. And the immune system, under all normal circumstances, is a second line of quality control, if we want to think about it that way. In the production, the cell is going through a process of quality control, but the immune system is a second line of quality control where abnormal cells are meant to be destroyed. However, as with any military, it can be overwhelmed. When the enemy's attack is very strong, when there's a lot of fog that affects visibility, when there are different things that actually kind of debilitate that army, the soldiers are not able to do their job properly. And in part 3, we're going to be looking specifically at those factors that overwhelm the immune system to the point that it cannot actually attack cancer cells the way that it's meant to.
Excellent. All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Jade. Well, it's time for us to wrap up this part 1. As you all know, there are 4 parts to today's presentation, today's summit. Our next section will be by Dana Geselshin, and she will be talking about those pesky little things that Dr. Jade just mentioned, parasites. That's one thing I just don't like the sound of at all. So Dana will be discussing parasites and the cancer connection. So you definitely want to stick around for that part. So that's happening in about 5 minutes. We've got 5 minutes to refresh ourselves and get ready for Dana's presentation. And then at 12:30, Dr. Jade will be back on talking about those key steps in fighting cancer. I know you all want to hear those key steps. And then at 1:45, Dr. Jade will be finishing up with an everyday routine kind of thing, something to get us started on what we can do to enhance our body's immune system fighting against cancer.